Hello and welcome to Study with Sudhir. आज हम पढ़ेंगे The Enemy, which is a 24-page long chapter in your textbook, the Vistas, and it's written by Pearl S. Buck, and it is based at the time of the Second World War. Now, बहुत लंबा है, so it always looks very daunting. अरे 24 पेज का chapter है, but frankly speaking, if you read it, it's actually quite a simple story of a dilemma, एक kind of, कि क्या decision लिया जाए, what decision should the doctor take? Should he save the patient even though he is an enemy, or should he turn him over to the police? So that's the dilemma. So that's the basic premise of this particular story. ज़्यादा complicated words वगैरह नहीं है, तो just take it as a story, and बाद में of course you will have the question and answers to take care of. Written by Pearl S. Buck. Now if you remember, आपने क्लास 10 में ऑलरेडी पढ़ा होगा that at the time of the Second World War, the USA and Japan were enemies, in the sense that Japan had gone and bombed Pearl Harbor, right? And in order to take revenge on Japan and to teach Japan a lesson, the USA dropped 2 atom bombs on Hiroshima on the 6th of August 1945 and on Nagasaki on the 9th of August 1945, right? And that brought the Second World War to an end, but it also kind of exposed the world to this absolutely dangerous word called the atom bomb, which has thereafter changed the whole dynamics of world history and geopolitics. Anyway, so this is basically about 3 main characters, and there are a few supporting characters, but basically a Japanese doctor who incidentally studied medicine in the USA, his wife, who is also a Japanese. There are references to his father, who is no more, and then there is this American soldier called Tom, who is a very young boy, whose age is not very clear. Sometimes they say he could be 25, sometimes they say he could be as young as 17. But these are the 3 main characters. There's also a general, an old general, who is one of the supporting actors, and then there are the servants in the house of the couple, the doctor and his wife. Okay, so these are the main characters in this particular story. So it's a time of the World War. An American prisoner of war is washed ashore in a dying state. He's in a pretty critical state when he's found by the couple, and he's found at the doorstep of a Japanese doctor. Should he save him as a doctor or hand him over to the army as a patriot? This line is at the heart of this story. इस कहानी का, and इसका कहानी का टाइटल, शीर्षक भी काफी सिंपल है, The Enemy, दुश्मन. लेकिन उस दुश्मन के साथ क्या बर्ताव, कि वो दुश्मन है, उसमें कोई दो राय नहीं है. There is no dispute over the fact that that American soldier is indeed an enemy as far as the Japanese couple is concerned. However, what should they do with him given the fact that he is also a doctor? Yes, he is a Japanese and therefore a Japanese patriot, but he is also a doctor who has taken that oath that he will save lives, right? So should he save his life, or should he say, "Baad mein jao, I will turn you over to the army and they can do whatever they would do with you," and they would obviously kill him, right? That's the story. Dr. Sadao Hoki's house, now this is the name of the main protagonist, was built on a spot of the Japanese coast where as a little boy he had often played. So he had spent his childhood there, so he had been pretty much there at that time, except for the time when he had spent in the USA to study medicine. The low square stone house was set upon rocks well above a narrow beach that was outlined with bent pines. As a boy, Sadao, I hope that's the way it is pronounced, Japanese names, we will prefer to call him Dr. Hoki or Dr. Sadao, had climbed the pines, supporting himself on his bare feet as he had seen men do in the South Seas when they climbed for coconut. So he's telling you something about rural Japanese life. Now, another interesting thing is the presence of the rocks. जो वहां पर चट्टाने हैं, okay, जहां पर वो जो पत्थर वगैरह हैं, they kind of, what do they really convey? They convey the kind of, that in the face of adversity, they are kind of conveying adversity, that they are standing firm against the adverse rough seas, the rough seas which are constantly hitting against the rock, but even when they hit the rock, it does not make any difference to its place. It does not move. So that is what the rocks are conveying. And that's precisely how Dr. Sadao Hoki will also eventually behave. That, even in the face of adversity, even in the face of a lot of opposition to the decision that he is making, he remains steadfast in his decision that he will eventually save the life of the American patient. As a boy, his father had taken him often to the islands of those seas, and never had he failed to say to the little brave boy at his side, "Those islands yonder" means, over there. Over there, they are the stepping stones to the future for Japan, right? So those islands are the stepping stones. And this is interesting. The islands are interesting. He's introducing the islands to you. And the island will play an important and a critical role at the end of the story. So please make a note of it. Okay, they are the stepping stones to the future of Japan. So, the father seems to be a well-read, aware kind of a person. Where shall we step from them? Now, he's taking it literally. When he says stepping stones, he is kind of taking it literally. He says, where shall we step from them? Sadao had asked seriously. Who knows? His father had answered, who can limit our future? It depends on what we make it. Now, this is again an important line. It shows that the father was an ambitious kind of a person. He was someone who believed in hard work and actually do the impossible, which is why I say it depends on what we make of it. In the sense, it is in our hands what we make of our future. And he says, what shall we step from them? He says, it depends on what we make it. So what, and this is some kind of a hint that these islands are going to play an important role in this story. और इसी द्वीप का, island का ही एक इस्तेमाल the doctor does in this particular story. इसी island का इस्तेमाल doctor does in order to save the life of the American injured soldier. Okay, so just make a note of this. This is important. अगर आपसे सिर्फ इस line का interpretation के लिए पूछा जाए, you can actually link it to what happens at the end of the story. Okay. Sadao had taken this into his mind as he did everything his father said, his father who never joked or played with him, but who spent infinite pains upon him who was his only son. So his father obviously had big dreams and plans for his son. Sadao knew that his education was his father's chief concern. For this reason, he had been sent at 22 to America to learn all that could be learned of surgery and medicine. So he had learned all about medicine and surgery in the USA when he was 22 years old. He had come back at 30. So please, just with a pencil, just keep marking these kind of, key points, 22, 30, so that you have an idea about how many years he spent in America, etc. He had come back at 30. That is 8 years he had spent there approximately. And before his father died, he had seen Sadao become famous not only as a surgeon, but as a scientist. Because he was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean, he had not been sent abroad with the troops. So he would be able to he had been able to almost make a discovery which would ensure that the wounds are kept entirely clean. So therefore, he had not been sent abroad with the troops. Also, he knew there was some slight danger that the old general might need an operation. So the old general in Japan needed an operation for a condition for which he was now being treated medically. And for this possibility, Sadao was being kept in Japan. So these were the two reasons why he was, one, because of the discovery that he was making. He was perfecting the discovery. It was not completely ready, which would make, the wounds entirely clean. And the second one, in order to treat the old general who was kind of suffering from a medical condition. Clouds were rising from the ocean now. The unexpected warmth of the past few days had at night drawn heavy fog from the cold waves. Sadao watched Miss hide outlines of a little island near the shore and then come creeping up the beach below the house. So he's describing the situation on that particular day when they would find this injured American soldier. Wreathing around the pines. Wreathing means almost like, to cross one another, almost like in a very twisting kind of a manner. In a few minutes, fog would be wrapped about the house too. Then he would go into the room where Hannah, his wife, would be waiting for him with the two children. But at this moment, The door opened and she looked out. A dark blue woolen hari, which is some kind of a costume, a loose outer garment wore over the kimono, which is a Japanese attire. She came to him affectionately and put her arm through his as he stood, smiled, and said nothing. He had met Hannah in America, but he had waited to fall in love with her until he was sure she was Japanese. So, it shows a, what does it show? एक तरह का एक conservative nature को display करता है, that he wanted to marry only a Japanese, also because his father will not approve of anyone else. His father would never have received her means approved of her, unless she had been pure in her race. He wondered often whom he would have married if he had not met Hannah, and by what luck he had found her in the most casual way, by chance, literally at an American professor's house. So, talking about how he had met Hannah, and he's kind of almost feeling very lucky to have met her and thereafter married her, because he wondered कि अगर इससे शादी नहीं करता तो किससे शादी करता मैं. Okay. The professor and his wife had been kind people, anxious to do something for their few foreign students, and the students, though bored, had accepted this kindness. So he's not being very, he's being nice, but he's also saying that, उनकी कंपनी में students bored हो जाते थे, लेकिन they still accepted their kindness because the professor and his wife were nice people, because they wanted to do something nice for their foreign students. Sadao had often told Hannah how nearly he had not gone to Professor Harley's house that night. So the professor's name is Professor Harley, the American professor, that he had not gone that night. The rooms were so small, the food so bad, the professor's wife so voluble. Voluble means someone who talks too much, very garrulous, very talkative. But he had gone there and he had found Hannah, a new student, and had felt he would love her if it were at all possible. Now he felt her hand on his arm and was aware of the pleasure it gave him, even though they had been married years enough to have the 2 children. For they had not married heedlessly in America. They had finished their work at school and had come home to Japan, and when his father had seen her, the marriage had been arranged in the old Japanese way. So it shows a traditional, conservative kind of a mindset of the father, and the child and the son is also very obedient. कि जो पिताजी कहेंगे मैं मान लूंगा, तो अगर आपको ये पसंद है, because he has accepted that she is pure in the race, in the Japanese way, and therefore his son can marry her. Although Sadao and Hannah had talked everything over beforehand, they were perfectly happy. She laid her cheek against his arm. It was at this moment that both of them saw something black come out of the mist. It was a man. He was flung up out of the ocean. Flung, it seemed. Flung means, एकदम, लहरों से एक तरह से, उसको as though the waves had kind of thrown him onto the shore. He was flung up out of the ocean. Flung, it seemed, to his feet by a breaker. It could have been any kind of a hurdle. He staggered a few steps, ladkhadaya, his body outlined against the mist. So you could see his kind of a silhouette. His arms above his head, then the curled mist hid him again. Who is that? Hannah cried. She dropped Sadao's arm and they both leaned over the railing of the veranda. Now they saw him again. The man was on his hands and knees crawling. Then they saw him fall on his face and lie there. So because he's not having the stamina to walk further. A fisherman, perhaps, Sadao said, washed from his boat. He ran quickly down the steps, and behind him Hannah came, her white sleeves flying. A mile or two away on either side there were fishing villages, but here was only the bare and lonely coast. So where they lived, it was not as if there was too much of habitation, human habitation. ज़्यादा लोग नहीं थे. थोड़े वो जो फिशिंग विलेज है जहां पर मछुआरों का गांव था, उससे थोड़े से डिस्टेंस पे उनका घर था. So initially they thought that it must be some kind of a fisherman who may have been washed ashore. The surf beyond the beach was spiked with rocks, that is, dotted with rocks. There were lots of rocks out there. Somehow the man had managed to come through them. He must be badly torn. So when you hit the rocks, obviously the chances of you getting injured are that much more. So they see that this fellow is probably lucky that he has managed to come out of it, escaping the rocks. They saw when they came toward him that indeed it was so. The sand on one side of him had already a stain of red soaking through. That means he was bleeding, यानी कि उसके शरीर से खून निकल रहा था एक तरफ से, और वहां पे शायद उसकी, I mean that must have been because of him hitting some kind of a rock. He's wounded, Sadao exclaimed. He made haste to the man, that is jaldi se wo aadmi ki taraf gaya, who lay motionless, his face in the sand, an old cap stuck to his head soaked with seawater. He was in wet rags of garments. Kapde obviously bhige hue the. Sadao stopped Hannah at his side and turned the man's head. They saw the face. A white man, Hannah whispered. Yes, it was a white man. The wet cap fell away and there was his wet yellow hair, long as though for many weeks it had not been cut, and upon his young and tortured face, that means, he had been tortured, was a rough yellow beard. He was unconscious and knew nothing that they did for him. Now Sadao remembered the wound, and with his expert fingers, because he's a surgeon, he's a doctor, he began to search for the wound. Blood flowed freshly at his touch. जो जहां पर छुआ खून और बहने लग गया. On the right side of his lower back, Sadao saw that a gun wound had been reopened. The flesh was blackened with powder. Powder means, there must have been some kind of a gunshot, so that gunpowder residue was still around there. Sometime, not many days ago, the man had been shot and had not been tended. That is, he had not received any medical treatment. That's what tended means. It was bad chance that the rock had struck the wound, और चट्टान उसी चोट पर जाके लगी थी, तो obviously उससे ज्यादा भी खून निकला था. It had become more serious. Oh, how he is bleeding, Hannah whispered again in a solemn voice, that is in a very serious voice and a very concerned voice. The mist screened them now completely, and at this time of day no one came by. So there was mist, and even though there was a fishing village nearby, no one came to that place. The fishermen had gone home, and even the chance beachcombers would have considered the day at an end. So the chance beachcombers means, by chance, any beachcombers means lazy or idle people who keep lying on the beach. Even the chance beachcombers means the by chance be who may be around there. Even they had considered कि आज का दिन खत्म हो गया, so nobody was there on the beach. What shall we do with this man? Sadao muttered, but his trained hands seemed of their own will to be doing what they could to stanch. Stanch means to stop the flow of blood, to stop the bleeding, the fearful bleeding. He packed the wound with the sea moss that strewed the beach. So whatever he could get on the beach, the sea moss जो रहता है, उसी से he tried to stop the blood from flowing. The man moaned with pain in his stupor. Stupor means he's unconscious, but he did not awaken. So, he knew that something was being done to his body, but he did not get up. He was not conscious. The best thing that we could do would be to put him back in the sea, Sadao said, answering himself. He's kind of talking to himself. Now that the bleeding was stopped for the moment, he stood up and dusted the sand from his hands. Yes, undoubtedly, that would be the best, Hannah said steadily. But she continued to stare down at the motionless man. If we sheltered a white man, now this paragraph is important. This particular passage that Sadao says is important. What is he saying? That if we sheltered, हमने किसी अमेरिकी को, white man को अगर पनाह दी, shelter दिया in our house, we should be arrested. The हमको arrest करेंगे. Because as Japanese, Americans are our enemies. We are not supposed to be providing shelter to an enemy. And if we turned him over, अगर हमने उसको arrest करने दिया as a prisoner, he would certainly die, means they would kill him. Now this is the dilemma. The kindest thing would be to put him back into the sea. So she's repeating what the doctor has said, the husband has said. But neither of them moved. They were staring with a curious repulsion upon the inert figure. Inert means someone who is not moving. Repulsion matlab because they don't want to be kind of, they are in a dilemma and they are not very happy with the position they are in. कि क्या किया जाए इस बंदे का. What is he? Hannah whispered. There is something about him that looks American. He took up the battered cap. Yes, there almost gone was the faint lettering, a sailor. Okay, so he's an American sailor from an American warship. So an American Navy man. He spelled it along, U.S. Navy. The man was a prisoner of war. So he had been caught by the Japanese, shot, and then he has probably escaped somehow. Something has happened and he's out at the sea, and that's how he has been washed ashore. He has escaped, Hannah said softly, and that is why he is wounded in the back. So he has been shot in the back. They hesitated. Then Hannah said with resolution, with determination, come, are we able to put him back into the sea? If I am able, are you? No, but if you can do it alone. So she says, if you can do it alone, I prefer you to do it alone. Hannah, Sadao hesitated again. The strange thing is that if the man were whole, I could turn him over to the police without difficulty. Were whole ka matlab hai that if he was not injured, if he were whole, were kab ka istemal kab hota hai? I hope you know the grammar. When something is not happening, when it is the possibility of happening is not there, or something which is not rooted in reality, then we use the the word were even with a singular noun or pronoun. तो अगर इसकी हालत बिल्कुल ठीक होती, अगर ये इंजर्ड नहीं होता, then I could have kind of handed him over to the police without any difficulty. I care nothing for him. He is my enemy. All Americans are my enemy. Important line, underline kar lijiye. And he is only a common fellow. You see how foolish his face is, but since he is wounded, all this is fine. But since he is wounded, that is what makes the difference for the doctor. You also cannot throw him back into the sea. Then there is only one thing to do. We must carry him into the house. Sadao says, but what about the servants? The servants may not approve, because the servants are all Japanese. They may not approve of what we are doing. We must simply tell them that we intend to give him to the police, as indeed we must. We must think of the children and your position. It would endanger all of us if we did not give this man over as a prisoner of war. So the wife's opinion is that हमको ये तो करना पड़ेगा कि इसको पुलिस को हैंड ओवर कर दो, बिकॉज अगर हम पुलिस को हैंड ओवर नहीं करेंगे, इफ यू डू नॉट हैंड हिम ओवर टू द पुलिस, इट वुड पुट द लाइव्स ऑफ यू, मी, द चिल्ड्रन एंड द सर्वेंट्स इन द हाउस, एवरीवन एट रिस्क. सर्टेनली आई वुड नॉट थिंक ऑफ डूइंग एनीथिंग एल्स. सो दैट्स व्हाट दिस डिसाइडेड कि इसको पुलिस को हैंड ओवर करना है. Thus agreed, together they lifted the man. He was very light, like a fowl who had been half starved for a long time, until it's only feathers and skeleton. So he's being compared to a murgi, a fowl. So his arms hanging, they carried him up the steps and into the side door of the house. This door opened into a passage, and down the passage they carried the man towards an empty bedroom. It had been the bedroom of Sadao's father, and since his death it had not been used. So it was an unused space in their house. They laid the man on the deeply matted floor. Everything there had been Japanese to please the old man. So they had kept the elderly person, the father of Sadao, the doctor, happy till he breathed his last, with everything Japanese. So you realize that, the Japanese conservative tradition and loyalty to the country is being reinforced very strongly throughout the story. Would never have been in this own house, sit on a chair or sleep on a foreign bed. So everything is on the floor. Hannah went to the wall cupboards and slid back a door and took out a soft quilt. Rajai. She hesitated. The quilt was covered with flower silk and the lining was pure white silk. He's so dirty. So she's worried that, her quilt will get dirty. He's so dirty, she murmured in distress. Yes, he had better be washed. Sadao agreed. If you will fetch hot water, I will wash him. I cannot bear for you to touch him, she said. We shall have to tell the servants he's here. I will tell Yumi now. She can leave the children for a few minutes and she can wash him. So she says, I don't want you to wash him. I will tell Yumi the servant and she will come and wash him. Sadao considered a moment. Let it be so, he agreed. You tell Yumi and I will tell the others. That is the other people like the cook and the gardener. But the utter pallor of the man's unconscious face moved him first to stoop and feel his pulse. Pallor means an unhealthy and a very pale appearance where there is no blood on the face and he's looking very, very pale. So he decided that, let me feel his pulse. Uski nabs kaisi hai. It was faint, but it was there. So it was not a very strong, which means that he was kind of sinking. He was not in a good and healthy condition at that point in time. He put his hand against the man's cold breast. The heart too was yet alive. He will die unless he is operated upon, Sadao said. The question is whether he will not die anyway. So if he is not operated upon, जैसी उसकी अभी मेडिकल हालत है, अगर उस पर ऑपरेशन नहीं किया गया तो ये जरूर मर जाएगा. लेकिन प्रश्न ये है कि अगर the question is whether he will not die anyway, हम उसको पुलिस को हैंड ओवर कर देंगे तब तो उसकी मौत हो ही जाएगी, उसको तो मार देंगे. So death in that sense is inevitable for this guy, is what the doctor concludes. Hannah says, don't try to save him. What if he should live? What if he should die? Sadao replied, right? So they are kind of considering the dilemma. What if he should live? क्या होगा अगर ये जिंदा रहेगा? He says, क्या होगा अगर ये मर जाएगा? So, he's talking about life and death as two possibilities. One, he can be alive, but death seems to be much more of a real possibility under the circumstances. He stood gazing down on the motionless man, that is someone who is not moving at all. This man must have extraordinary vitality, that is he must be very strong, willpower, everything, or he would have been dead by now. But then he was very young, perhaps not yet 25. So they are trying to guess iski umr kitni hogi, and the first time they think he must be around 25 or less than 25. You mean die from the operation? Yes. Hannah considered this doubtfully, and when she did not answer, Sadao turned away. At any rate, something must be done with him, and first he must be washed. He went quickly out of the room, and Hannah came behind him. She did not wish to be left alone with the white man. He was the first she had seen ever since she left America, and now he seemed to have nothing to do with those whom she had known there. So you see the ironies or the situation that both of them had been educated in America, had spent a significant amount of time in the USA, and now they were face to face with someone who they considered an enemy. So you keep that in the background, because that's an important consideration that you need to bring in. Here he was her enemy, a menace, living or dead. So for her, he was a problem. She turned to the nursery and called, Yumi, but the children heard her voice, and she had to go in for a moment and smile at them and play with the baby boy, now nearly 3 months old. Over the baby's soft black hair, she motioned with her mouth, Yumi, come with me. I'll put the baby to bed. Yumi replied, he's ready. So she's like the caretaker for the children. She went with Yumi into the bedroom next to the nursery and stood with the boy in her arms while Yumi spread the sleeping quilts on the floor and laid the baby between them. Then Hannah led the way quickly and softly to the kitchen. The two servants were frightened at what their master had just told them. So the two servants had been told by the doctor as to what had really happened, and they were frightened because they were Japanese. The old gardener, who was also a house servant, pulled the few hairs on his upper lips. The master ought not to heal the wound of this white man, he said bluntly to Hannah. The white man ought to die. First he was shot, then the sea caught him and wounded him with her rocks. If the master heals what the gun did and what the sea did, they will take revenge on us. So he is being very superstitious. So he is saying, उसकी मौत लिखी हुई है. क्यों? क्योंकि पहले गोली मारी गई, उसके बाद समुद्र ने किया जो भी करना था, चट्टानों से टकराया, उसके बाद भी डॉक्टर अगर उसकी जान को सेव करने की कोशिश करता है, बचाने की कोशिश करता है, then the sea will take revenge on us. That is, we are doing something which the sea intended to do to him. The sea intended to kill the American soldier. We are trying to save the American sailor, and therefore the sea will take revenge on us if we try to go against the wishes of the sea. So he's being very superstitious. I will tell him what you say, Hannah replied courteously, but she herself was also frightened, although she was not superstitious as the old man was. Could it ever be well to help an enemy? Nevertheless, she told Yumi to fetch the hot water and bring it to the room where the white man was. So you see the dilemma that the couple is facing, the doctor and his wife, ki kya kiya jaye? Because they are getting this opinion, contradictory opinion, ki isko bachane ki zarurat bilkul nahi hai, from the servants who are Japanese, who are completely against the idea of doing anything good to the American sailor. She went ahead and slid back the partition. Sadao was not yet there. Yumi followed, put down her wooden bucket. Then she went over to the white man. When she saw him, her thick lips folded themselves into stubbornness. That is, she did not want to do this. I have never washed a white man, she said, and I will not wash so dirty a one now. Main nahi karungi. Hannah cried at her severely. You will do what your master commands you. तुमको वो करना पड़ेगा जो तुम्हारा मालिक तुमको करने के लिए ऑर्डर करता है. There was so fierce a look of resistance upon Yumi's round, dull face that Hannah felt unreasonably afraid. लेकिन जिस तरह का फेशियल एक्सप्रेशन यूमी की शक्ल पर उसने देखा, उसको देखकर Hannah को डर लगा. Okay, that she felt afraid. After all, if the servant should report something that was not as it happened, like अगर वो बाहर जाके रिपोर्ट कर देते हैं इस बारे में, then खतरा किसको होगा? It will happen to the couple. Very well, she said with dignity. You understand, we only want to bring him to his senses so that we can turn him over as a prisoner. कि हम उसको होश में लाना चाहते हैं ताकि हम उसको prisoner की तरह उसको अरेस्ट करने के लिए दे दें. So that's what she says. I will have nothing to do with it. I am a poor person और ये मेरा काम नहीं है. Then please return to your work. Then तुम छोड़ दो, तुम अपने काम पे चले जाओ. Yumi left the room, but this left Hannah with the white man alone. She might have been too afraid to stay had not her anger at Yumi's stubbornness now sustained her. You know, last time she left the room because she did not want to be left alone with the American sailor. But this time she stayed on because उसके दिमाग में वो गुस्सा ज़्यादा था. Her anger at Yumi's stubbornness, was there playing on her mind. Stupid Yumi, she muttered fiercely. Is this anything but a man, and a wounded, helpless man? In the conviction of her own superiority, she bent impulsively and untied the knotted rugs that kept the white man covered. Then she had his breast bare. She dipped the small clean towel that Yumi had brought into the steaming hot water and washed his face carefully. The man's skin, though rough with exposure, was of a very fine texture and must have been very blonde when he was a child. So she's kind of beginning to clean the sailor. While she was thinking these thoughts, though not really liking the man better now that he was no longer a child, she kept on washing him because she's used to kind of dealing with children. She has two little children. So she's used to dealing with children. So she kind of also reacts as a motherly kind of a figure, right? Because she's thinking about, oh, chote mein he must have been a good looking blonde kind of a child. But he was no longer a child. She kept on washing him until his upper body was quite clean, but she dared not turn him over. Where was Sadao? Now her anger was ebbing and she was anxious again, and she rose, wiping her hands on the wrong towel. Then lest the man be chilled, she put the quilt over him ताकि वो warm रहे, उसको ठंड ना लगे. Sadao को बुलाती है. He had been about to come in when she called. His hand had been on the door and he opened it. At the same moment he entered. She saw that he had brought his surgeon's emergency bag and that he wore his surgeon's coat. So he was ready to perform the operation. You have decided to operate? Yes. He turned his back to her and unfolded a sterilized towel upon the floor of the tokonoma alcove and put his instruments out upon it. Just look at the book where you will find the meaning of the tokonoma, which is an niche or an alcove in a Japanese home for displaying a flower arrangement. Okay, flower arrangement, kakenoma or other pieces of art. Fetch towels, he said. She bent obediently, but how anxious now, to the linen shelves and took out the towels. There ought also to be old pieces of matting so that the blood would not ruin the fine floor covering. So you see the thing, she wants to help her husband. At the same time, she wants to ensure. Pehle she was bothered about the silk quilt. Now she's bothered about the flooring ki wo ganda na ho jaye because of whatever happened during the surgery. She went out to the back veranda where the gardener kept strips of matting with which to protect delicate shrubs on cold nights and took an armful of them. So some kind of a matting material she took to put on the floor so that the floor doesn't get spoiled. But when she went back into the room, she saw this was useless. The blood had already soaked through the packing in the man's wound. So, the doctor is not so bothered about these things and had ruined the mat under him. Oh, the mat. Yes, it is ruined, as though he did not care. Help me to turn him, he commanded her. So he's also bothered, but he says, yeah, it is ruined. He's not as perturbed about it as the wife was. She obeyed him without a word and he began to wash the man's back carefully. Yumi would not wash him. Did you wash him then? Yes. He did not seem to hear her, but then she was used to this absorption, means total focus and concentration. When he was at work, she wondered for a moment, if it mattered to him, what was the body upon which he worked so long, as it was for the work he did so excellently, right? So whose body it was, the doctor did not seem to care. He was only bothered about कि उस body पर डॉक्टर को क्या काम करना है. So he was a thorough professional, right? A humane professional who was not bothered कि ये बंदा कौन है जिसका कि मैं ऑपरेशन कर रहा हूं. He was only bothered about कि उसमें क्या ठीक कर रहा हूं. That was what he was focused on. You will have to give the anesthetic if he needs it. But never have I. It's easy enough, he said impatiently. He was taking out the packing now and the blood began to flow more quickly. He peered into the wound with the bright surgeon's light fastened on his forehead. वो forehead पे लगा के जो light देखते हैं. The bullet is still there, he said with cool interest. Now I wonder how deep this rock wound is. If it is not too deep, it may be that I can get the bullet, but the bleeding is not superficial. He has lost much blood. At this moment, Hannah choked. He looked up and saw her face the color of sulfur. That is, she was kind of very pale. Don't faint. He did not put down his exploring instrument, that is with the light and the instrument with which to see where the bullet is. If I'd stop now, the man will surely die. She clapped her hands to her mouth and leaped up and ran out of the room. Outside in the garden, she heard her retching. Retching means she's vomiting. So she's not been able to take what she saw, the blood, the wound, it can be a gory sight for people who are not used to seeing all this. But he went on with his work. It will be better for her to empty her stomach, he thought. He had forgotten that, of course, she had never seen an operation. But her distress and his inability to go to her at once made him impatient and irritable with this man who lay like dead under his knife. So he wanted to go out and help his wife, but because he was in the middle of that surgery, he was not able to do that, and so therefore उसको गुस्सा आया at this man जिसको कुछ पता नहीं है उसके साथ क्या किया जा रहा है, उसको पता नहीं है और वहां पर पड़ा हुआ है. उसको देखकर इसको थोड़ा चिड़चिड़ापन हुआ. He got a little irritated. This man, he thought, there is no reason under heaven why he should live. I don't see any reason why this man should actually live. Unconsciously, this thought made him ruthless and he proceeded swiftly. In his dream, the man moaned, but Sadao paid no heed except to mutter at him. So he's doing it with a little of anger, resentment, that would be the word to use, that he was resenting what he was doing it, कि मेरे को इसके साथ ऑपरेशन करना पड़ रहा है, मैं अपनी वाइफ की मदद नहीं कर पा रहा हूं, एंड और ये दुश्मन है मेरा, कोई कारण नहीं है जिसकी वजह से मुझे ऐसा लगे कि that this person should actually live. Groan. He muttered, groan if you like, I'm not doing this for my own pleasure. In fact, I do not know why I'm doing it. So he's kind of talking to himself कि मुझे नहीं मालूम कि मैं ऑपरेशन क्यों कर रहा हूं. The door opened and there was Hannah again. Where is the anesthetic? She asked in a clear voice. Sadao motioned with his chin. It is as well that you came back. This fellow is beginning to stir. We need to kind of, administer the anesthesia because he's beginning to move जब मैं surgery कर रहा हूं. She had the bottle and some cotton in her hand. But how shall I do it? Simply saturate the cotton and hold it near his nostrils. Sadao replied without delaying for one moment the intricate detail of his work. So he's continuing to perform the operation while giving instructions on how to apply the anesthetic to his wife. When he breathes badly, move it away a little. When he reacts a little in an adverse manner to the anesthetic, then move it away a little. She crouched close to the sleeping face of the young American. It was a piteously thin face. So she's again observing his face because now she's going close towards his face. So she's seeing his face in close-up. She thought, and the lips were twisted. The man was suffering whether he knew it or not. Watching him, she wondered if the stories they heard sometimes of the sufferings of prisoners were true. They came like flickers of rumor told by word of mouth and always contradicted. So prisoners of war के साथ जिस तरह का torture वगैरह होता था जब उनको capture किया जाता था, she had heard a lot of those kind of stories by word of mouth. कोई किसी ने कुछ बता दिया, कई बार उसके against contradiction होते थे, rumor होता था. इस बंदे को देखकर जो कि prisoner of war obviously था because उसको गोली भी लगी थी, उसने सोचा कि क्या वो कहानियां सब सच्ची होंगी. So she is kind of also thinking of various things. In the newspapers, the reports were always that wherever the Japanese armies went, the people received them gladly with cries of joy at their liberation. But sometimes she remembered such men as General Takima, who at home beat his wife cruelly, though no one mentioned it now that he had fought so victorious a battle in Manchuria. So she is talking about one General Takima. जो कि he was a wife beater, so in that sense someone not a very likable guy, someone who was who about who everyone knew that he was assaulting his wife. लेकिन अभी उसके बारे में उस डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस के बारे में कोई बात नहीं करता था, क्योंकि उसने मंचूरिया पर काफी बहादुरी दिखाई थी, काफी साहस दिखाया था. He had kind of won a battle in Manchuria. If a man like that could be so cruel to a woman in his power, would he not be cruel to one like this, for instance? तो अगर वो ऐसा जनरल टकीमा जो कि एक अपनी वाइफ के साथ राइट वाइफ के साथ इस तरह से बर्ताव कर सकता था, दैट ही वुड बीट हर, व्हाट इमेजिन व्हाट वुड ही डू टू अ मैन लाइक दिस जो कि दुश्मन है. सो ही इज थिंकिंग ऑफ डिफरेंट थिंग्स. She hoped anxiously that this young man had not been tortured. It was at this moment that she observed deep red scars on his neck just under the ear. Those scars, she murmured, lifting her eyes to Sadao. But he did not. So they saw some scars on his, deep red scars on his neck. But he did not answer. At this moment, she felt the tip of his instrument strike against something hard, dangerously. So now he felt the tip of his instrument against the kidney. All thought left him. He felt only the purest pleasure. He probed with his fingers delicately, familiar with every atom of this human body. So it obviously shows that he is a very trained surgeon. He's a trained surgeon who obviously knows how to kind of operate on the human body. His old American professor of anatomy had seen to that knowledge. Ignorance of the human body is a surgeon's cardinal sin. That sin, he would say, that एक सर्जन की सबसे बड़ी नाकामयाबी या गलती, सिन को हिंदी में क्या बोलेंगे, गलत काम तो हो गया, पाप. सबसे बड़ा पाप ये होगा कि अगर he does not have knowledge of the human body's anatomy. If a surgeon does not know the anatomy of a human body, for a surgeon that is like the greatest sin. It's an important line. He had thundered at his classes year after year to operate upon, and this is applicable to anything that you do. Tomorrow, if you want to become a motor mechanic, I'm just giving a random example, you should be able to know the inside of every motorcycle that comes to you for repair, or every car that comes to you for repair. Same thing. Anything that you do, ensure that you are the best in that business. And I'm telling this to you as general gyan. Anything you want to become a singer, become the best possible singer in that particular field. That's important. To operate without as complete knowledge of the body is, if you had made it, anything less that is murder. That is, when you are operating upon, you need to have complete knowledge of the human body. Agar wo nahi hai, to tum actually, you are committing a murder. Because you don't know and you end up killing the person. Why? Because of your own stupid ignorance. It is not quite at the kidney, my friend, Sadao murmured. It was his habit to murmur to the patient when he forgot himself in an operation. My friend, he always called his patients, and so now he did, forgetting that this was his enemy. Then quickly, so this is interesting, that he would always call the persons who is operating upon as his friend. And who is the friend? In this case, it's the enemy. So he's calling the enemy as my friend because that was he speaking as a doctor. You see the whole dilemma between him being a Japanese and him being a doctor. That is where he's oscillating between. So as a Japanese, this man is his enemy. As a doctor, this man is his friend, my friend. So in any answer, when you have to talk about the dilemma, please bring out this point about my friend and the enemy. So forgetting that this was his enemy. Then quickly, with the cleanest and most precise of incisions, that is making the cut, the bullet was out. The man quivered, but he was still unconscious. Nevertheless, he muttered a few English words. Guts, he muttered, choking. They got my guts. Sadao, hush. The man sank again into silence, so profound that Sadao took up his wrist, hating the touch of it. Yes, there was still a pulse of it, so he thought maybe he has died. So feeble, but enough if he wanted the man to live, to give hope. but certainly I do not want this man to live, he thought. No more anesthetic, he told Hannah. He turned as swiftly as though he had never paused, and from his medicines he chose a small vial. Vial means wo jo tube milti hai. And from it he filled a hypodermic and thrust into the patient's left arm. Then putting down the needle, he gave him an injection. He took the man's wrist again. The pulse under his fingers fluttered once or twice and then grew stronger. This man will live in spite of all, he said to Hannah and sighed. Sighed means he doesn't deserve to live. So you see, uske dimag mein, as I said, he's constantly oscillating between his desire to save his patient and his desire to see the American die, right? So he says he does not deserve to die, but he's also very concerned, so he's constantly checking his pulse, because then he's reacting as a surgeon. The young man woke so weak, his blue eyes so terrified when he perceived where he was, that Hannah felt compelled to apologize. She had herself served him, for none of the servants would enter the room. So the servants had refused to kind of enter and help Hannah. So she had to do it all by herself. What we will do is, we will pause here. I don't want it to become a very longish video. I'll just take a break. So in part 2, we will do the remaining 12 pages. We are on the 13th page right now. It's about a 24-page long story. So in part 2, we will do the rest of the story. But till now, I hope it's clear as to the dilemma that the couple is facing, especially the doctor, and what will happen, what happens thereafter now. How does he kind of resolve this dilemma? What does he do, and why does he do that? Okay, so that we will do in part 2 of this story. Tata, bye bye.